Hey, welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel. Either way, my name's Nick, and I make videos about things I'm interested in. Today, that's Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, the newest attempt at an Indiana Jones game. But you know me, I can't simply talk about the game itself, so before we get to the Great Circle, let's take a brief look at the past Indiana Jones games to see how they led us here. The first ever Indiana Jones game was released for the Atari 2600 and holds the distinction of being the first officially licensed video game movie adaptation. It was based on the first of the Indiana Jones movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and fittingly went by that same title. Now, being an Atari 2600 game, you can imagine the graphics were rather simple, and the puzzles were all but unsolvable without a guide. In fact, they had a whole helpline for people who were stuck on their puzzles. After all, these people were basically inventing video game mechanics, so I think we can give them a break if these early games weren't exactly perfect. However, this was just the beginning of the adventure for Indy. In the ensuing years, we would see roughly 20 games released for various systems, everything from Tomb Raider-likes to text adventures and point-and-clicks. It was clear the name Indiana Jones sold, and I mean, why wouldn't it? There's a reason Tomb Raider and Uncharted basically just kind of ripped off the concept whole cloth. It's a surefire win. Who doesn't want to go adventuring around exotic places, solving arcane puzzles, and narrowly escaping death? Just me? Well, regardless, the success of the indie games spoke for itself. But then, one day, when the Fire Nation attacked and everyone needed him most, Indy vanished. After the publishing of Indiana Jones Adventure World on Facebook Games of all places, the franchise took its longest hiatus yet. The IP hadn't gone more than 5 years without a release of some kind on some platform somewhere, and yet, poof, like that, it was gone. And the absence certainly didn't go unnoticed. Indie fans had been starved for another entry in the iconic franchise for almost 13 years at this point, so when The Great Circle was announced in 2024, tensions were high. And aside from the usual skepticism that rightly surrounds game announcements in the modern era, there were also lots of concerns around one mechanic specifically, which differentiated this game from all the rest in its lineage, and that was its implementation of Up until now, all the Indiana Jones games had taken a third-person approach, and I mean, that makes a lot of sense. You want to actually see the iconic character you're playing as, and it was a proven formula for these kinds of adventure/puzzle games in the past, so why break from the formula? Well, a lot of speculation around the studio making it, Machine Games, started being raised. This was the studio that gave us the absolute masterpieces that were the Wolfenstein games, and they did work on the amazing Doom remakes as well. Basically, they know cinematic first-person development. Now, I personally agreed with a lot of the speculation. I felt, as many other people did, that it was a waste of the IP to stick the camera behind Indy's eyes and rob the player of the iconic visuals we all grew up on. However, it's very clear that Machine Games know what they're doing when it comes to making compelling first-person shooter narratives. I had played their other games and absolutely loved them, so while I was a bit skeptical and disappointed at the idea of playing in first person, I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. After all, they've never let me down before, so if there was anyone I was going to trust with this iconic piece of media, it would be them. And boy, oh boy, did they not disappoint. So, now we have a bit of background for the expectations people had going into this game. Let's talk about Alright, first things first, let's talk about that first-person perspective. While I don't think it would have been a bad idea entirely for this game to be designed around third-person action-adventure, I do think that decision to place you inside the head of Indy really does add a lot to the experience. And to be clear, you're only in first person for the actual gameplay segments. For the cinematics, you're watching from third person just like you would a normal movie, and this combination, I think, is what makes it work so well. It's very clear to me that the team making this knew darn well that they couldn't deprive fans of the feeling of watching an Indiana Jones movie. But they were also very clearly aware that the game itself would play far better in first person. Not only does the first-person perspective differentiate this game from the slew of others that came before it, but it also allows you to not simply feel like you're watching an Indiana Jones movie, but really feel like you're in one. which is the feeling fans have been wanting since Raiders originally released in 1981. I don't know how they did it, but the feeling of playing as Indy in this game is everything I've ever wanted out of Indiana Jones as a video game. Every time I crack my whip, or get into a fist fight with some Nazis, or solve a puzzle with some secrets in a temple deep underground, it feels like I'm inside the game, living out my childhood fantasies of being Indiana Jones. All the little things are handled so well in this game. Most of the gameplay itself is just walking around trying to figure out where to go or what to do, but they found a way to make doing that not feel tedious and boring, and instead make it feel engaging and interesting. It always feels like there's something around the next corner that you can discover, and everywhere you go is packed full of fun little side mysteries and secrets that you can solve. I don't think I've played a game that makes me feel this engaged when simply looking at the map since, I don't know, I don't even know. I can't think of a time that I felt like this when I was playing a game. Now, remember, I'm going into this game being a lifelong Indiana Jones fan. I loved the movies as a kid, and me and my brothers would go out and explore every chance we got. All I wanted as a kid was to have an Indiana Jones bullwhip and a hat, and I remember going to Disneyland and being in awe of the Indiana Jones section. Indiana Jones was just such a huge part of my childhood that I'm probably the exact person this game was made for. Someone who loved the franchise growing up, but hadn't really engaged with the media outside of the movies. I think I may have played the Lego indie game at some demo kiosk at my local Fry's when that was still around, and it's only last year that I played Fate of Atlantis, so I'm by no means someone who's hyper super fan and knows all the ins and outs of Indiana Jones, and all the lore and the secrets and Easter eggs, but my desire for that feeling of adventure is unmatched. It's honestly probably what drove me to games in the first place. While I obviously can't go around being Indiana Jones in real life, I can get a taste of that experience and that feeling in a video game. I'm saying all of this so you can understand that, no, this isn't an objectively perfect game. There are flaws and jank. If what you're looking for is the absolute most polished and bug-free experience, well, you probably shouldn't be playing video games. But this also just very much isn't that. The character animation is a bit stilted and at times awkward. The lighting can make people's faces look a little bit like it's made out of model magic sometimes, and the pathfinding and companion stealth is frankly just not really great. I mean, I appreciate that they don't make it so if you're trying to be stealthy and Gina's tagging along with her horrible pathfinding, it doesn't give you away, but it's also a bit immersion breaking when you're hiding from a Nazi, and if you so much as peek your head around the corner, they'll be alerted, but Gina can just walk right out in front of them and they'll pretend that she's not even there. But ultimately, I don't care about any of that. The game gives me exactly what I want, an Indiana Jones adventure where I can feel like I am Indy. And that's something I never really thought I would be able to get out of a video game to a satisfactory degree, but I think in this game, I absolutely do. And they do it expertly. While the performance could do better overall, and we will talk about that in a bit, the actual gameplay and story are top-notch. So let's talk about those for a bit. I'll go ahead and start with I don't think I've played a game with hand-to-hand combat that feels this good. Not only does it have enough challenge to make combat encounters meaningful and properly incentivize you to interact with the game's stealth mechanics, but the feeling of the combat, again, like everything else in the game, makes you feel like you're in the movie. Everything from the stances to the sound when a punch lands, it feels like you're in a real-life 1900s fisticuffs. It's never as simple as just clicking punch until the bad guy goes down. Now you can do that with lower level guys a little bit, but even then they'll get a punch in every once in a while, which will break your flow, and if you want to be able to take them down quickly, you need to make sure you get the jump on them. But even then, if you do manage to just spam them with punches, if you're not careful, they may alert other enemies nearby. All of this incentivizes you to engage with one of my favorite mechanics in the game, the stealth takedowns. This game borders on Arkham levels of satisfaction with the stealth takedowns. They're creative and silly in just the right ways. Like, instead of simply grabbing a guy from behind and choking him out, you have to grab an object from the environment and use that to take them out. I think one of my favorites is the classic glass bottle over the head. It's just never not satisfying. But it doesn't stop there. All the different objects have different takedown animations. Now, there are repeats, so it's not like every single time you use it, you'll get a new animation, but they mix it up enough to never let it feel too repetitive. This is the kind of attention to detail that makes a game go from good to great in my eyes. The team working on this very clearly knew the source material extremely well and understood the vibe they should be going for on such a high level. Whenever you're in hand-to-hand combat or doing a takedown, it feels like something straight out of the movies. The knockdowns are always satisfying and just a bit funny, with how the enemy slowly gets less and less stable and eventually just falls over like a plank of wood. The character that they imbue into this game with small things like this is unmatched by almost any other game I've played. As someone who really likes the overacting and almost theatrical nature of early Hollywood, seeing this kind of thing in a game just gives me chills. But that's enough about the combat. Let's talk about the story. The story of this game is like if you took an Indiana Jones movie and just jacked it up with steroids. Now, when adapting a movie story into a video game, you are always going to face some immediate challenges. One being the runtime. While a movie is considered too long if it runs over about 2.5 hours, in video games, people are generally looking for the experience to last as long as possible. So if you want to take a traditionally cinema-bound franchise and adapt it to the medium of video games, you're going to need to make some expansions. To that end, this story has far more twists and turns than most indie movies. While you might traditionally have a few twists that send Indy on some convoluted side quest, in the game, the story is like 80% diversions and the like. Although I don't think this is actually a bad thing. While doing that in a movie is generally frowned upon as just kind of adding fluff to pad out the runtime, in games it's a very useful tool, and one that audiences generally appreciate. Game audiences are usually looking for their games to entertain them for a bit longer than 3 hours, and most gamers would consider a game with lots of side quests, mini puzzles, and adventures to be kind of the ideal scenario. While that's by no means the case for everyone, it is the case for a large portion of gamers, and for adventure games like this, where you're kind of living out a fantasy, the more time you can spend in the world, the better as far as I'm concerned. But there really isn't anything stopping you from just beelining the story if that's the only thing you're interested in, and I still think you would have a great time if you approached it that way. I'm not a writer, and I'm not going to be able to give you some deep story analysis of the story itself, but to me, a normal guy coming into this game loving the franchise, I think it absolutely delivers on the feel of the movies. And none of it feels forced or like a contrivance just because it's a video game. Everything feels natural and believable within the Indiana Jones universe. Take the romance subplot, for instance. The progression feels extremely natural and in keeping with Indy's reserved and goal-oriented personality. In fact, I think the romance in the games is done far better than in the movies. Where in the movies, the women are kind of just there to make Indy look like a hero and give him a vulnerable damsel to save from some vicious natives. We'll get to that part soon. Gina in the game has her own motivation and her own goals, and she absolutely feels like at every turn, if it would benefit her more, she would ditch Indy and go out alone. What I'm saying is that it feels like Gina is there not because the writers wanted her to be, but because she wants to be, and because she has a reason to be there. And the progression of their romance feels way more natural given the much longer runtime of a game versus a movie. Overall, I think Gina is one of my favorite companions on any indie adventure. She feels like an actual real person and not just a living trope. The last positive I'll talk about is the overall ethos of the team making the game. While I haven't talked to any of them, so this is pure speculation, from what I can gather, they're all really big indie fans, and I think one of the better examples of that is the fact that they have you start out the game playing through probably the most iconic scene in Indiana Jones history with the opening from Raiders. They clearly know exactly what a fan of the franchise wants, and they're absolutely willing to give that to them. And something that I think other takes on this kind of game miss a lot is just how smart Indy is. He's not really an adventurer by trade. The reason that he's so good at what he does is because of his encyclopedic knowledge of his field. I think a lot of interpretations of Indy and his genre of media often forget that he isn't just some guy who goes around exploring temples and ruins. He's an archaeologist, and he uses his knowledge of archaeology and ancient civilizations to aid in his adventuring. not the other way around. And I think this game really does a great job depicting his absolutely neurodivergent levels of hyperfixation on archaeology or whatever mystery it is he's involved with this week. And I think that kind of thing really does take a team of people who really know and really love the source material in order to really depict it well. However, this is where we kind of switch gears so that we can talk about some of the things that the game doesn't depict super well. Now, I titled this section Nitpicks because there are things that kind of ate at the back of my mind while playing the game, but they didn't ruin the experience for me. However, depending on who you are, they might be bigger issues to you. The first is technical. The game is in many ways designed for the future. I'm sure you've seen the headlines that you need a graphics card with RT cores in order to play this game. That is because they've implemented ray tracing at a core level in the game, which theoretically should make it able to run better and more efficiently. However, the state of ray tracing capable hardware right now makes that experience just a bit lacking in the frames department. While everything does absolutely look stunning in many scenarios, the performance leaves something to be desired. And keep in mind that I have an RTX 4070 Super in my system, which sure isn't the top of the line, but it's no slouch either. And still, I'm getting maybe 60 FPS in this game without using any of Nvidia's nifty tricks like DLSS or FrameGen. Though it should be noted, I personally love FrameGen and I always turn it on when it's an option. I've never seen any degradation in the actual quality of the image when I use it, and when compared to the option of using DLSS, which I do absolutely notice a huge quality difference, it's an absolute lifesaver. I personally don't dock points for a game needing things like FrameGen to play to my desired frame rate. There will always be a give and take when it comes to the performance of a game, and frankly, given how long it takes to render a single frame for something like a Pixar film, it's kind of incredible that we can get anywhere even close to that level of fidelity at all, let alone at 120 FPS. But again, that's going to be very much a personal preference. You may not want to play a game that can't run 4K 360, and that's fine. That's totally up to you, and if that's you, then this isn't going to be the game to play. But if you're willing to make some small compromises, I think the performance, while not ideal, is far from problematic. However, something that is a bit more problematic is the politics of the game. Yeah, that's right, we had to mention it eventually. The ethics of playing a game that is entirely centered around the early 1900s practice of going into colonized countries and taking their historically significant artifacts and putting them in a British or American museum. Now, the game does try to address this, and frankly I think it's probably about as good as they could be expected to do. They mention on multiple occasions that Indy isn't here to simply take artifacts, he's here to protect them from the Nazis who want to use them as weapons or just destroy them. They draw a pretty cutting parallel between Indy and Voss, the Nazi archaeologist who is your direct rival. And they have characters constantly calling Indy out for basically being a grave robber. And to their credit, the actual artifacts that you're going after aren't that of any existing culture, but an ancient predecessor civilization, so you could argue it's maybe less bad because of that. And that's all well and good, and it's better than just playing him off totally non-critically. However, there is a bigger picture issue that they just kind of simply couldn't avoid, and that is the fact that Indiana Jones, being a good guy actually, kind of just serves to whitewash the archaeological societies of the 1900s and what they actually were. While Indy is a legit professor and he is genuinely trying to protect the artifacts that he collects and brings to a museum, the actual real people who were doing that weren't really doing it for such noble reasons. Most of the time it was just because they didn't see the people of the cultures who created them as human or civilized, and they just used that as an excuse to steal their culturally significant artifacts. And it was these archaeologists of the early 1900s that are the reason that many countries outside of Europe and the US don't have access to a lot of their own heritage. Overall though, this game is an absolute triumph of game design, and if you like Indiana Jones at all, you need to give it a try. It's probably one of the best AAA games I've played in a long time, and if you're also feeling a bit down on the AAAs, then this might be a good one to play because it really does feel like just a video game-ass video game. And that's something I feel like we see less and less of these days from big AAA devs. But that's going to be it for today. thank you for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Let me know what your thoughts are on all of this down in the comments. I always love to hear from you all down there. Also, in case you didn't notice, I've enabled memberships for the channel, so if you like my videos and you want to help me kind of make this whole thing a little bit more sustainable for myself, please consider signing up to one of those 2 tiers that I have available right now. They're both exactly the same in terms of what you get, so just sign up for whichever one your budget allows, or neither. You just being here and watching these videos is support enough. Also, just know no matter how much you give or don't give, I really appreciate your support. It really does kind of mean the world to me. Other than that though, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, happy gaming.